I'm Cheryl Jansen, Sopheon's Global Marketing Director. Today's webinar is titled Agility in Enterprise Innovation, Leading Practices for Consumer Goods Firms. The goal of this webinar will be to outline how companies could see value from applying agile development principles and translating them into new practices for process and portfolio management. Our presenter today is Bryan Seyfarth, Director of Consumer Goods for Sopheon and the Consumer Goods Segment Leader for Sopheon's Accolade Solution Suite. Bryan is an acknowledged expert on product development process optimization for consumer goods manufacturers. His perspective and analysis have been published in CGT and Retail Leader, to name just two, and he's a frequent conference presenter. Bryan has advised consumer goods companies throughout the world on the use of innovation best practices to improve new product output and financial success. Bryan, we're happy to have you with us today. And with that, I'll turn the session over to you.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Cheryl, for your introduction. And thanks to those of you in the audience that are spending part of your business day with us. As I hope you can tell from that introduction, I am pretty passionate about helping food and beverage and consumer goods firms innovate more effectively. And I've been fortunate enough to see a lot of companies make some real significant progress in that area. So, which I'll describe here in just a few minutes today. But my goal today is to share some new ideas with you that I hope will contribute to your efforts to achieve agility and innovation, and thereby accelerate the pace of high-value innovation across your entire company. Let me begin with just a very short introduction to my company. Sopheon provides solutions for enterprise innovation management. And I'm presenting to you, by the way, here today from our headquarters in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We help our clients achieve sustainable, profitable revenue growth by creating a steady stream of high-value product and process innovations, and by reducing the cycle time from consumer insight to market launch. One of the things that's unique about Sopheon is that we're more than just a software company. The reason that we're successful is that we also bring in domain expertise and best practices to each engagement that we have with our clients. And as you can see here, we've got a real significant amount of experience working with world leaders in the consumer goods space, including 7 of the top 10 largest CPG companies in the U.S. We also work in other industries, and one of the most fun parts of my job is taking lessons learned from vastly different segments of the business world and finding new ways to apply them in consumer firms. But enough about Sopheon. To introduce today's topic, I'd like to begin with a question, and it's a rather odd question. I'm just going to admit that. But I wonder if you know the answer to this. Do you know if elephants can swim? Now, for some strange reason, this is a question I thought of when planning this webinar. And I've got to admit that while I thought I knew the answer, I wasn't entirely sure until I Googled it. And the answer is absolutely. Elephants, like most mammals, are actually known to be very good swimmers. And as you can see here from our friend on the right-hand side, they move all 4 of their legs to do so, and they can actually swim better than a lot of other mammals. Apparently, their large bodies provide enough flotation, while their trunks act as a kind of a snorkel, as you can see from our friend here on the left. Now, I thought about this question in relation to this webinar because in some ways, the swimming elephant represents what a lot of business leaders are trying to do to make their companies do. So they've got these huge animals in the form of a large enterprise, and they're trying to push them to perform this very specific type of activity, agile innovation, which we usually only associate with a leaner, more athletic body type. And yet, as you can see here, it is possible for elephants to swim, and I hope you'll see in this webinar today that it's also possible for large and medium-sized companies to innovate in a much more agile manner than they do today. So let's also begin by first thinking about the reason why this is so important. Unfortunately, you just don't have to look very far to see that the business environment for most consumer firms is pretty turbulent and daunting. Now, the economy is continuing to improve, but there are still a large number of challenges, and these are especially acute in the food and beverage space, as you can see from all these headlines here. There's dramatically shifting consumer preferences, demographic changes, new pathways to distribution, and new technologies make it just means for these consumer firms they're more challenged than ever just to keep up. But one of the things that we have also found is that there is one principle that still endures, and that is those companies whose pace of innovation matches the pace of change can still successfully ride that wave of change. Now, there's another challenge, unfortunately, and that is that innovation by itself is a real source of difficulty for these companies. Research studies have just consistently shown over time that there's this high failure rate for new consumer products. Depending on the study, that failure rate is typically between 80 and 90%. The most recent study that I found on this was from Nielsen. They examined over 60,000 new SKU introductions and found that 52 weeks after introduction, only 24% of those SKUs were still on the market. For those products that actually made it into year 2, Nielsen has also found that over 50% of those failed to sustain their year 1 performance in year 2. So innovation is required to respond to this turbulent and changing market, but it's also a real challenge by itself. And this is especially true in these medium to large enterprises, which have to have a larger scale of success for their innovation efforts to make a meaningful difference in their growth plans. So if you think about it, for these small up-and-coming companies, making fast changes in response to the environment it just kind of comes with the territory. But the question is it really possible for larger enterprises to have a similar level of agility? This theme of enterprise agility has become increasingly important, with more and more large companies asking how they can innovate at the pace of a smaller company and still leverage the scale advantages they've got as a much bigger organization. In the last few years, there have been some lessons learned in the world of software development that we see offering some new answers to this question.